This is the first song we recorded off the project. The project is called The Hierophant. I made this project with my student, Cashin. This is my wife singing.
Builders and buildings, they find a business. We built this, they find our interest, but business, they find us interest. Indulge indigenous images in our villages. Vintage shit, fight for vengeance. Real niggas, we fight with penmanship. Builders and buildings, they find our business. We built this, they find our interest, but business, they find our interest. Indulge indigenous images in our villages.
My name is Terry Borderline. I'm a recording artist, songwriter, producer, engineer, and arranger. My government name is Terrence Boardnave. When I changed my name to Terry Borderline professionally, I moved it a little bit from the name Boardnave, because people call me Terry regularly. Borderline has to do with the crossroads, right? The event horizon, where you're in one reality, you're in one paradigm, where maybe you believe everything that's said on the news, you believe everything they taught you in school, you believe everything your parents taught you, and you cross over that threshold into a new world from the truths that I've been dropping, right? When I was younger, I had a speech impediment, so like I was bullied by friends, family. People would call me the R word, right? Things of that nature, and that stuff really hurt my self-esteem as a kid. But by the time I was like 9 years old, my friend Eric, we would hang out with him all day, ride bikes and stuff like that. And then him, my brother Michael, and me, we would freestyle. He'd just play a beat, and then they would start, freestyling. And I'd notice when I jumped on the beat and I said certain things, everybody would be like, "Oh, like, it was that Terry said this, Terry did that." So that made a positive impression on me, and I realized like, oh, I really like making music. Like, people don't make fun of me for this, right? People actually listen to me, and from there on, that's when me and music were like this. I fell in love.
Music can do a lot of different things. One thing that it does is, these are all kind of like truisms, but I'll go through them anyhow. One thing that music can do is it gives people a means to express themselves, to sort of talk with and deal with, either in terms of like narrative to narrate things that they think up, or stories or experiences. It allows them to sort of express themselves emotionally. But also, music is a creative practice that can, in many ways, be profoundly communitarian, right? So, different ways of making music, of listening to music, of dancing to music, are also ways of bringing together these little communities, whether they're people who are at a live performance, or people who have an affinity for the same artist, or people who are in a group sort of making music together. All of those things are ways in which these sort of micro communities, or temporary communities, or maybe communities that continue to exist over time, can sort of come together. My name is Michael Birnbaum Quintero. I'm an ethnomusicologist, and I'm the chair of the musicology and ethnomusicology department in the School of Music at the College of Fine Arts at Boston University. My own research is about Latino and especially Afro-Latin American music.
So when I look at my identity, I'm like, I value my identity, right? But sometimes it's not just enough for me to hold that value to myself. How do I show my legacy, show people who look like me, who think like me, who share my values, people who don't look like me, people who don't share my values? How do I give them a record of me so they can understand themselves more? So yeah, music is my main tool for that, is my main apparatus for that. And every time I make music, I put my all into it, because it's like I gotta make this the most beautiful moment possible for future generations.
Another thing that I think is really important that music does is that, and probably art in general, is that artists and people who are being creative are often referencing other artists and other creative acts or other musicians that they know. And so, in some ways, you have this kind of sort of historical discourse over time in which one performer refers to an earlier performer, refers to an earlier performer. And so there's actually ways of understanding histories, people's histories, community histories, that are built into artistic practices like music.
I think finding community as a queer person, I think I've been really blessed in it, and I also think I have been inheriting a legacy that has been built across centuries of choosing family. I think that's like the beauty of queerness. Like queerness saved my life. It forced me to ask, to look at every part of my life and ask, can I have more? Can this be different? Do I need to remain held by these things that I know don't work for me? And so in that reinvention comes also the ability to reinvent how we treat family. My name is Micah Rosecrans. First name is spelled Micah, and I really welcome any pronunciation of those letters in folks' tongues, languages, and I use they, them pronouns. In describing myself lately, I've been using the term memory artist because I think so much of my work has to do with how do we build and shape and tend to a collective memory. I wear sort of many hats and like try and do like many mediums of artistry to achieve that mission, but I think at the core I'm an artist who works with memory. I found theater at an early age in like third grade, and I was really excited by just like getting to play different characters. I felt like living in a very multicultural and intergenerational context growing up. I like immediately knew how to oscillate between different selves, like different versions of self and different ways of like carrying myself. And so acting as a form was super easy. I could access. I knew performativity like before I feel like I got to know like I don't know self, or that's how I found self, was through knowing that I could be many within the singular one.
One of the problems that I have with the use of identity is that it assumes that sort of some people have identities and some people don't really have identities, or they have unmarked identities or what have you. What that also means is that certain people, let's say artists, because that's what we're talking about, have to participate in art from the standpoint of what they are sort of labeled as in terms of their identity. So what that ends up meaning is that, for example, I can't be an ethnomusicologist. I have to be a Colombian American ethnomusicologist, which of course I am, or a male ethnomusicologist, which of course I am. But nonetheless, that doesn't mean that I'm necessarily limited by those perspectives in a really, really hard and fast sort of way.
People will often, I think, exoticize and tokenize me for my identities, and so the truest action I can take in excavating that is to try and reverse it through my embodiment and say each time, like, as soon as you try to single me or silo me into this one narrow perception, I will show you my multitudes. My multitudes will answer you, and that is the way that I think I try to reverse or inverse this possibility of identity getting in my way.
And the idea of identity could mean somebody's lived experience. It could be how someone represents that lived experience to other people. It could be their sort of positionality and degree of power or representation within society. There's a lot of different things that are sort of collapsed into this idea of identity. So, for all of those reasons, I think that art comes out of people's experience and the things that they're trying to do in the world. Obviously, both of those things are covered under the rubric of identity. But again, I think those are very different. Um, those are very different ways of thinking about art and the relationship between art and someone's own thinking and personal circumstances and how they feel about things.
My identity is not my obstacle. It is people's perception of what they treat as my identity is the obstacle. And that is like part and parcel to, I think, this larger, what I would verbalize as a misconception in society that identity is static. I think we are so pulled in a time of justice and truth telling to be like, I am, because these different ands that we are have been these sort of latch points for hatred. And so it becomes really important to our resistance movements to find a way to articulate ourselves. But in that articulation, I think we can lose the sort of more organic truth that we are fluid beings.
I think as a Black woman in white spaces, I stay aware of that, but I also don't expect those white spaces to know how to take care of my soul. My name is Aisha Upchurch. I am born and raised from St. Louis, Missouri. I am an artist and an educator. I don't separate them, they go together. I call myself the dancing diplomat, as movement is such a dominant part of my way of understanding the world, making meaning, feeling whole and human and heard and held and all those things. After college, after grad school, I'd now gotten into the dance community in the DC area, was working in an AmeriCorps program as an educator. So those artists and those educator sides of my life were doing this duet. Over the course of over a decade, it took a while to reconcile that my artistry feeds my educator mind feeds my artistry. The stage is a classroom, the classroom is a theater. The challenge, obstacle in the kind of field of arts education is that there's work that we need to do, real work that we need to do for those of us who identify as arts educators inside the sector on re-narrating what it is that we do. So let's stop hamstringing what arts education is to a metric that has nothing to do with what arts competencies are. The other one is one that's a bit larger to US society and education in general, I'll say public schooling, is we have a really distorted understanding of integration. True integration means that the value of all things that are being brought together are equally and equitably upheld, valued, recognized, and that they are ciphering with each other to create something beautiful together.
I've built this skill over time of teaching myself, I want to do this, or I'm going to learn it. And money is also a huge factor. I didn't have the money to go to college. I didn't have the money for music classes. I didn't have the money to just pay, studios or people for their services or things of that nature. And it's been a blessing and a curse. It was a curse in the short term where it was like, why can't I do what I see other people doing? But it was a blessing in the long run in the sense that now I know how to accomplish things with minimal budgets. I know how to accomplish things with minimal help. And when I do have help, I'm usually knowledgeable in what that person is doing in order to have the right person for the right job at the right time. In terms of engineering and production, Loop Lab was a huge influence on me.
My name is Christopher Hope. I am the founder and executive director of the Loop Lab, which is a nonprofit organization that has the mission to bring more women and people of color into the audio-video industry. There's many go-getters out there, self-starters, and people that are very creative. but oftentimes they just don't have access to the training, education, and resources to make it happen. And that's what we do. We scaffold much of the foundational knowledge, information, and resources and finances that they need to start in the industry. I think the challenge is that you don't know what you don't know, right? And if your angle at coming at media arts is being a YouTube tutorialist, or you have a YouTube channel or a TikTok channel or whatever that looks like, that's fine. And our job here is to broaden someone's myopic viewpoint of what they think they can achieve content-wise. I think that all of those different formats are great. There's nothing wrong with wanting to do music, and let's explore these other opportunities and these other options. And 9 times out of 10, many people didn't even know many of them existed.
There are so many inequalities around access, not only to the material things that are needed, like whatever, band instruments or paintbrushes or whatever, but I think that there's also a really serious gap in the ways in which people are allowed to imagine themselves as creative, right? To understand themselves as creative actors, or to understand their own creative practice as artistic in any sort of way.
Many of the young adults that are coming into our space, they're coming from low-income communities where there's multi-generational poverty, and that is unfortunately set them in a position of failure in life. Many of them have not seen themselves in any kind of context as a professional media artist. And when you don't have that kind of representation from your community, if you're Asian American, if you're African American, or you're Haitian American, whatever that is, it's harder for you to see yourself as a sound engineer or a video professional, right? And so what we try to do to break that down is we have other instructors that come to teach very specific workshops from all over, and they're coming from different ethnicities, different sexual orientations, the different racial orientations, you name it, so that people can not only learn but also feel comfortable in seeing someone who comes from the neighborhood and similar background as them being a professional in the field. And so for us, it's really about closing the gaps as we see them existing.
On one end, I think I'm really excited around educators who are going, you know what, since everything is pivoting, here's the way to take advantage of this. And in other ways, I have to allow myself not to be shocked, or else like that's just a futile exercise. But it's disconcerting to realize how hard people will fight to stay in the comfort of whiteness. And that's not just folks who identify as white. Whiteness, the sickness of whiteness can affect anybody. And the sickness of whiteness in education and arts education looks like don't change anything.
I think cultural equity, I've been really challenged lately with this feeling of like, I don't actually think like these ways of articulating these terms will ultimately get us to what we need, because like, as I've been saying, like, language is not static, and what we need is not static. It is ever moving and ever evolving based on the circumstances we are in. And so cultural equity as a term is I guess, one framework through which we can advance creative justice.
I think for those of us who can find strength to be inside of institutions and understand how we can push from inside, even knowing we're inside, I'm excited by that.
I've seen many young people wanting to express their perspectives on issues, whether it's George Floyd and some of the protests and challenges, but also some of the more localized concerns in their neighborhoods, which I think are just as important. And I think that that's the beauty of diversifying the media arts workforce, is that you have more diverse perspectives, people that are not just from different racial, ethnic identities that are being represented and gender identities being represented, but the thought processes, and they're bringing their worldview and realities. I think that as a society, we can't take for granted the enormous amounts of inequities that exist in the lives and communities of different kinds of people in our society. And until you address some of those inequities and respond with your dollars and respond to actually being actively engaged with those communities, you're going to continue not to see diversity. And I think that that's really a detriment to our society and a detriment to the industry itself.
As important as it is to create pathways for people to become professional artists, I think it's more important for people to understand themselves as having the potential for creative practice and to bringing creative practice into their daily lives.
Pennies mightier than the sword. Nothing's mightier than the sword. Pennies mightier.